This is the What's Next Teacher Podcast with your host, Dr. Julie Warner.
Here you'll hear from former teachers who have left the classroom for thriving careers in and outside of education to help you picture yourself on the other side and land the job of your dreams.
If you're feeling confused about what to do next, stuck, or fearful about paying the bills, What's Next Teacher has your back.
Now here's your host, Dr. Julie Warner.
Welcome back. Today I'm talking with Matthew Woods of the Leading Out the Woods podcast. Matt's a former educator who now works in the education space in a couple of different capacities, just a few. He's a school administrator. He's a children's book author. He's a sometimes education professor. He's an adjunct professor. And he also does speaking, consulting, course creation. He's really done so much and is just a dynamic person. I think you're going to learn a lot from this episode. So let's dive right in with Matt.
Today on the show, I have Matthew Woods. He is a school improvement coach, a sometime adjunct professor, a district administrator, a speaker, a consultant, is writing books and creating master courses. So he's someone that came immediately to my mind to share with you how he thinks about transitioning out of the classroom, about different career directions, and just about how he thinks about personal development and networking and finding those kinds of opportunities that sometimes can feel a little bit elusive. So, Matt, thanks for joining us.
No, Julie, thanks for having me. And as you were saying that, I kind of felt my anxiety, like, man, I stay pretty busy. That's a lot of stuff she was saying out there. But yeah, but thanks again for having me.
Yeah. Well, let's jump right into it. I would love to hear a little bit about your background as a classroom teacher and sort of, why did you start teaching? What did you teach? How long were you in the classroom directly?
Sure. So, like I said, first off, thanks again for having me. My career in education, obviously, for, I would say 99% of folks in education, it started in the classroom, right? I was a high school history teacher. Specifically, I taught world history too, and a couple sections of criminal justice. And my road to education was interesting because growing up, I didn't want to be an educator. I have family members who are, teachers, and some are administrators, and like my mom, for example, she was a high school science teacher. She became an administrator. So I often tell people, I saw the window shopping version of education per se, right? As a student, you go in, you see your teacher, you see your administrator, you're like, oh, okay, this is kind of what they do. Okay. But then I told folks I saw when the store would close per se, and I would see the late nights grading papers. I remember one that really stood out to me when my mom was getting cussed out on the phone by a parent. And I remember standing there just like, hey, why are you letting them talk to you like this? Like, you don't deserve it. And her explaining to me later, and obviously I'm a kid there. So it's like, nah, you ain't gonna talk to me like that. That ain't the job I want to do.
Yeah.
So I was very adamant, hey, I don't want to have anything to do with education, because I used to tell people behind the curtain, I saw all the stress, the late nights, all this stuff. And I said, hey, who in their right mind would want to do that, right? So
Right.
fast forward my senior year of high school, and I'm in the store with my mom, and this lady runs up, and she's like, oh my God, Miss Woods, it's you. Now, mind you, my parents split when I was young. So my mom had changed her maiden name back. So when this lady said Miss Woods, I'm like, man, you taking it way, way back. like back in the day. And, my mom was speaking to her. She was like, "Hey, honey, it's good to see you. So I hope none of my mom's former students are listening, because that's code word for she probably forgot your name." But she was being very cordial and everything. But I remember the way that lady looked at my mom. And she made it a point to get her son and was like, "This is Miss Woods. She changed my life. She was an amazing teacher." And the way she just looked at my mom, like she looked at my mom like she was a celebrity. Like, I mean, like she was looking at her in a way that I remember to this day. I told my mom, like, the impression stuck with me that I wanted to have that impact on somebody. Where
that was more powerful, even, it sounds like, than some of the negative sorts of things
yeah,
you
it
saw
was.
behind the curtain.
It kind of was like, oh man, I think I want to do this whole education bit. But Lord knows science was my forte. I was more of like English, history, social studies route. So, like I said, I ended up then the light bulb went off for me to get into education. Like I said, I was a high school history teacher, and I absolutely loved it. I'm very fortunate, and I thank God every day that I kind of found my niche. Because I think sometimes sometimes you have a passion for something, or something, it becomes your niche, but it might not be something you really want to do. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And I was
Yeah.
fortunate that I found my niche, but then it was something that I love to do. I mean, I love education. I love helping people learn, not just students, adults. I mean, I just love having that impact, and then reflecting on what could I've done to communicate better, to make this stick better. Like I said, I was just very, very fortunate and blessed, and I loved it. And yeah, like I said, I started in the classroom as a high school history teacher, and loved every minute of it.
Yeah, that really resonates with me. I loved that iterative nature of teaching too, where you're just always perfecting it. But, for me, that was about as far as I could advance, because there were just no career pathways. Once you're a teacher, you're a teacher. But I know you took one of the few opportunities I think there are to advance within a school or within a school district beyond just perfecting your craft, and that's being an administrator. What was that transition like for you?
So I know I'm gonna sound like a broken record, but once again, so I got the urge that to be a teacher, and I remember folks talking to me saying, "Hey, Matt, I'm seeing leadership qualities in you. Have you ever thought about being an administrator?" And I remember laughing, Julie, when someone said that to me. I said, "Hey, my mom was a high school principal. I saw how many years you took off her life, literally, the late nights working the game." I was like, I don't want any part of that. Like, I want to go get my doctorate, teach at the college level. And, in my head, I had this plan, right? And I think, all of us were in our early 20s. We feel like even then we have the world figured out, right? So I had my life plan, like, yep, I'm gonna teach 3 to 5 years, transition into a PhD program, and then get at the college university, hopefully, or teach the college level per se. And like, I was fortunate to have amazing mentors that people would always say, Matt, you see the bigger picture. And one thing that a mentor of mine said, which really kind of sparked interest, he said, Matt, you're going to see that every teacher doesn't operate like you. And I was like, well, what do you, I didn't know how to take that. And he said, just give it a chance, just see. And I tell people, when you take that plunge into administration and you start having that macro view,
yeah,
you really start to see things from a different level, because you now are looking at a lot of that operational stuff, and you're starting to realize, hey, these processes and procedures and policies and systems, hey, they do matter. The way I do a master schedule, it will dictate student behavior and staff behavior.
Yeah.
Hey, if I don't have a process to get kids from point A to point B, yeah, there could be an uptick in discipline, in the number of fights and altercations. You start to sit back and realize there are certain puppet strings that you can, I'm serious, like that you can kind of tweak and play with that can dictate behavior and the type of responses you get. And I found myself, Julie, starting to gravitate to that. I'm starting to really zone in on that why. Now, you know what? Now I see why we have this. Now I see why we need to reinforce this. Those whys started becoming clearer for me.
Yeah.
And then I was like, hey, I want to help others help that sink in for them. So yeah, from there I transitioned into being an administrator. I've served in several roles. I've been like a middle school assistant principal, high school assistant principal, but a middle school principal, and now at the district office level, and seeing how all those things come into play is amazing. But I tell folks, going back to the initial reason why I got into education, it's helped connect so many dots, and it's helped me see things in a whole different light, but most importantly, inspire me to make sure that I'm delivering that why and doing my best to communicate what needs to be done to teachers, to students, to community members, parents, etc., to make sure that everybody is understanding what we're doing and why we're doing it.
Yeah. Yeah. I could see how that would be central. It's extremely powerful. Well, we connected originally because you'd reached out to me, just a cold message on LinkedIn,
Yeah.
I think.
Mm-hmm.
And I admire that because I'm also a cold messenger on LinkedIn. And when I sought to expand beyond education, or at least beyond the school district, I was just going on LinkedIn and typing in keywords for things I was interested in and asking people for coffee. Can I just hear about your life experience, your career, and how you've gotten here? I just think you've done amazing things. I just want to learn from you. And, people are generally pretty amenable to having a 30-minute coffee. And I'm talking about, like, I was reaching out to the chief of staff for the U.S. Secretary of Education, and she did a 30-minute phone call with me. It blew my mind.
Mm-hmm.
But I wonder if you can talk a little bit about how you think about networking or reaching out to folks for collaboration opportunities, because I think a lot of people feel like networking is a dirty word, or like it's predatory, or like you're just trying to use someone. And I know you don't think that like that. I don't think like that. So I'd love to hear you kind of talk about how you think about it.
Certainly. I mean, I think networking is good because for a lot of reasons. One, you meet new people, right? And because of that, you get an influx of new ideas and a person to bounce ideas off of. And I think in education, one of the things that I've slowly started to understand through my career is that a lot of the issues that we all face are actually the same. When you talk about discipline, we talk about how students learn, communication with people, this, that, and the third. It's all essentially the same. Where it differs is the context in which you deliver that message.
Yeah.
But the premise or the problems are essentially the same. And what's interesting is when you network with people and you bounce ideas off of, and I pose this to the listeners, and I'll even pose it to you, Julie. You know how, like, you meet somebody, they can, I don't know, different state, different school district, school, etc., right? And you start talking about something, and someone will be like, "Oh yeah, I know, yeah, the same thing happens here." Like, people take for granted sometimes how often you talk about something and someone goes, yep, I know exactly what you're talking about. Yep. Oh, so you know that person?
So true.
No, I don't know that person, but I've been in a similar situation. So right there, you see a common denominator, right? That main premise. But where it differs and where networking is so important, at least from just a standpoint of growth and self-awareness, is you get to hear how folks have thought through issues. And you get to hear their positives and their flaws. And I think sometimes we don't, it's just, and I'm just talking about as human beings, as people, we don't do a good job of just listening to listen, not to respond to what they're saying, but listening like, okay, tell me, Julie, how you navigated this. Like, okay, so tell me about your experience and just listen. And then you self-reflect on, okay. So Julie, that happened with her, but when I did it, this didn't happen. So maybe it's because I did this. Okay, let me hear a little bit more and just think about how you can connect those dots. That to me is the biggest benefit of networking, right? The other thing too is you get to hear from people and their experiences. And if you actually listen and take in what they're saying, it will allow you to grow at an exponential rate. And what I mean by that is if someone has already went through the trials and tribulations you're thinking about going through, that doesn't mean the same thing will happen to you. But if you listen enough, you'll know those landmines to avoid. And you might get there quicker than they are, or you might realize, hey, instead of going right, I'm gonna take this detour and go left and get to where I need to be. And I think sometimes we don't, especially now, and now I'm really kind of tiered to education. We don't do that in education a lot because and I know, Julie, being in higher ed, you've seen it, and even from the practical in the classroom point too, that rubs sometime when we talk about theory and practice. And you'll hear people say, oh God, they're just throwing theories out there. They don't get it. They're not here. Well, no, they're seeing it from a different level, but practical pieces is informing that theory. And then vice versa, the theory that they're talking about, some practical people, however you want to call it, have been doing it and they're trying to make sense of it. So I think sometimes we put ourselves in silos, especially in education, and we don't have appreciation for both sides. And because of that, that can stunt advancement and growth and opportunities for folks.
Yep. I love what you're saying about, just that really attuned kind of listening, because you never know what can arise during those kinds of conversations. I remember thinking that there was such a hidden or unexpected benefit to having coffee with someone that I really admired. It kind of humanized them. And, most of the people I talk to and continue to talk to, are so humble. And somehow that translated to building my confidence and thinking, okay, well, this person has done this thing that just boggles my mind, but they seem kind of, down to earth, cool. We have a lot in common, and maybe I could do something earth-shattering too. So not even, just getting those sorts of questions that you come with answered or having your agenda sort of furthered, but it is there's some element of serendipity there too. And I know a lot of the outgrowth of the different coffees I had with people or the different Zoom chats I have had with people is you just never know where it could lead later.
Educators, you've given so much. You deserve to feel respected, fulfilled, and supported, and you're more marketable than you know. Let's find the right fit for you for the next phase of your career.
Visit whatsnextteacher.com for one-on-one career coaching, job application materials, unteacherizing your resume, interview preparation, negotiation assistance, and Julie's course, the 21-day Career Transition Challenge.
And now, back to the show.
And I know you and I talked recently about your new position as a school improvement coach, and you said, things just keep lining up for me. And I know that's not necessarily fate or, that you've manifested this or whatever, but that doesn't just happen out of nowhere. I think that your general orientation, kind of putting yourself out there, is how that happens. But I don't know if you have any thoughts about how that happens. How do things just sort of line up? Is there any kind of thought you could share with the listeners about how they can kind of create opportunities for themselves like that?
Sure. For me, I'm a firm believer in your mindset. Like, I can't control, you really can't control what other people say about you to an extent. You can't really control to an extent other people's actions, but you can control your own actions. You can control your own mindset. And I know for me, one of the biggest things of personal growth was in administration, seeing that, because, as an administrator, a lot of times you're tasked with being I don't want to use the word out of context, like when I say level-headed, but you got to be the neutral one. Mm-hmm. And you've got to be almost like the punching bag, because I think a lot of times, there's so many things that people say to me, and I laugh sometimes and wonder, it's clearly because I'm an administrator. Because if I was out in the street, nobody would walk up to me and talk crazy. You know what I'm saying? You often think sometimes, is the role that I'm in projecting that it's okay to be the punching bag for some of these things, right? And I have a mentor of mine who often shares that same kind of mindset or analogy. But what he would say is, but Matt, you always dictate your responses. And it stuck with me. So it's that idea that, hey, I'm just going to project positivity. I'm going to do the best I can. And I know if I do good work, good things are going to happen for me, because I'm putting forth maximum effort and I'm trying to do things the right way. Mm-hmm. And I know it might sound cliche to your listeners, but I truly believe it in my heart. And like you said, it's allowed things to open up for me. And I've been really fortunate and really blessed, but it all still just comes back to the work. I tell people, you'll hear folks say, oh, I want to do this, I want to do that. And it's like, okay, do you have any credibility? Do you have something where folks can look and see, hey, you've done this that you're talking about, and been successful at it? Because I'm a firm believer in, hey, what I'm doing, I want to be the best at what I'm doing. And that alone can open doors if I wanted to, Mm-hmm. And I think now when you think about, the year we're in now, oh God, it's 2022. Oh Lord, I had to stop and think about it for a second, Julie. 2022. But you think about the things with technology now, how people communicate, all these different platforms. There's really no excuse where folks shouldn't be connected. When Julie, if you kind of think about you and I, when we started our careers, right? When you think about when we start our careers to where we're at now, there's no reason. When I hear people say, I don't know how to do this. Mm-hmm. Have you heard of YouTube? Have you heard of Twitter? When I hear people say that, especially even as educators, I'm like, now wait a second. We're in the world now where I can search something and I'm going to get a response. And then in that response, it could take me less than 30 seconds to get to the answer. Mm. So there's really no excuse. So I throw this back to listeners. When I hear folks say, I want to start a podcast. Okay, watch a YouTube clip on it. Go ahead and get started. I want to write a book. Okay, you can self-publish stuff now. Okay, here's how you do it. Okay, you want to build content. Okay, here's how you start building content. I mean, if you've got the drive and you know what you're talking about, the ways to get stuff out there, now things are so accessible, there really is no excuse. It's just a matter of if you have the right mindset that you're putting forth that positivity, which in turn is going to lead folks to hear, want to come and listen to what you're saying and take it from there.
Yeah, that really rings true. And I think a lot of folks will feel like they have to be an expert at something before they can dive right into it. And I don't know if that's the fear of failure or just that the reception won't be there. I'm not really sure, because I'm like you. I do like to just jump in and figure it out, and I typically won't be able to figure out everything that needs to be done to accomplish something until I'm in it. And I think there's really not another way, but I think it does keep folks from starting something totally different. What would you say to someone that wanted to, for example, just leave the field of education altogether and find a career outside of the education space? Like, a lot of people just don't know where to start that I work with.
No, I think that's a good point. And I think it comes down to this, and I would pose this to the listeners out there. One thing, and it's very cliche as well, you hear educators say, kids need to be, critical thinkers, right? And they got to have creativity, imagination, these 21st century skills, But what I pose back to educators when I hear folks say, I want to make a change, or I still want to be in the classroom, but I want to also do this hobby or do something else. And it's like, okay, of all people, it should be the easiest for you. Because if you're teaching these skills and you're embodying them, it shouldn't be hard for you to pivot. What do I mean? Okay, crap. Dr. Warner didn't tell us today they're doing a fire drill first period. So I got to pivot and change part of my lesson plan when I come back in there. Okay, so if you can pivot on the fly with 30 kids in your classroom of all ages, doing God knows what, you can't make a pivot one day and say, like the example I used earlier, okay, now I want to start a podcast. Shouldn't be, you know what I'm saying? That shouldn't be that hard. Because the difference is you have the mindset to focus on that goal instead of someone forcing you to pivot because of something that's out of your control, like a fire drill, right? When you think about supervision, one of the things, and I have several of my colleagues who are they train teacher educators, right? Pre-service teachers. And I say, hey, do you ever talk to them about supervision? And they're like, well, what do you mean, Matt? I'm like, you know what proper supervision looks like. So proper supervision is I'm not going to line up 48 8-year-olds and then I'm walking up front and got my back turned to them the whole time. I mean, you can, and Lord knows what you can find behind you, right? You would want to be able, where you're parallel, to keep an eye on the whole line. Or better yet, it's probably wise for you to do what? Follow them from the rear. So you can see everything in front of you. I mean, now let's be honest. I don't know about you, Julie. I didn't never had anybody explain that to me in my pre-service courses. But the thing was, once I got in the classroom, it just made sense. I kind of realized real quickly, and I was working with high schoolers. Lord knows I can't take my eye off of them. Who knows what they'll do, right? I mean, you just
starting fires.
Yeah, like, I mean, I think we were all 15, 16 one time. I mean, you just automatically know, like, hey, this just wouldn't make sense for me to leave a bunch of kids unattended. Like, once again, no one necessarily is quote unquote teaching you that. You just step in the role and instinctively you pick it up. So I think for your listeners are folks who are like, hey, I want to pivot, or how do I pivot? You start thinking about all the things that you are intuitively doing every day. And then you just apply it, because skills are very transferable and universal. And kind of like when you were saying earlier, Julie, some of the stuff that I'm doing, and I have folks like, hey, man, I don't know how you do all this stuff. Nothing I'm doing is outside of the skills that I've learned through education and being a classroom teacher. The content that I talk about on my podcast, it all comes from real life experiences that either I've been involved in or other amazing educators who hop on my podcast have talked about. And we turn into a conversation. The same conversation, Julie, you were referencing when you were grabbing a cup of coffee with people. I just recorded, put it on a podcast, kind of like what we're doing now, right? When we talk about, hey, Matt, you're building content or you're making these master courses for folks to take. Okay, I built and streamlined content when I was in the classroom. So I know how to dissect curriculum. I know how to make curriculum. So I'm doing the same thing. I'm just putting it in a different medium and platform.
That's super inspiring. Yeah.
I mean, how do you, Matt, you speak to different folks and you travel and you do this and you're speaking to all these different people. You're right. The same way I got up and had to realize I got to learn how to speak in front of kids. I got to learn how to speak in front of parents. I got to learn how to speak in front of colleagues because of my various roles. The same thing. It's just transferable. So I think when people dial it down that way, you really get to the point that I really understood, which is, do you really have that drive to do it? Because it's not a matter of skills anymore. It's that, hey, you might not actually have that drive to want to do that.
Well, how do you identify a drive versus just like an interest? Like, how do you know when you've got the drive?
Okay, I'll give you one. I was always interested in writing books. I always said, oh man, I want to write books, right, Julie? But I was like, what do I want to write a book about? Do I want to write a book about a history book? Believe it or not, Julie, you could quote me now. Hopefully I'll come back to it in a few years. I was trying to write my own graphic novel because I grew up loving comics.
That's cool.
But then it kind of hit me when I had my son, and I'm big on reading. My wife's big on reading. And I realized, hey, why can't I find any books that represent our family? Why is it so hard to find a biracial main character? Mm-hmm. Like, why is that? Like, I remember someone like, why am I, I don't want to shout out different stores and they try to, ban your show, but several stores that a lot of us know where I'm looking for books and I'm like, hey, I can't find anything like this. Why is this such a struggle? So that interest of a book turned into a drive, because then every night I was looking at that little guy and starting to wonder, hey, is he going to have some of the same thoughts that I had as I got older, wondering, why don't I see anybody that really looks like me in these different roles? Why am I getting older? I'm starting to see that separation. Like, what's the deal? So that in turn inspired me to start the book series based after my son. So I tell people, staying up at 9, 10 o'clock, or, when most folks are winding down, nope, I get on the computer for another hour or so and draft out a script for the illustrator. That doesn't feel like work. It feels like drive, and it doesn't burn me out. So I think separating, Julie, that you have interest, but when you get that drive behind it for the interest, things just start rocking and rolling.
Yeah. And I think you probably can identify that pretty early on too. So not a lot of wasted time.
Definitely.
That's really awesome. And Matt, I know you've got a podcast, Leading Out the Woods, which I had the pleasure of being a guest on. And how do you think about your podcast in relation to the other things that you're doing?
So the podcast is funny. The podcast came about because of, believe it or not, my resentment in higher ed, to a degree, because I got the feeling that when I was writing, as I'm writing my papers and things, I was like, hey, this doesn't feel very authentic. Like, okay, I'm gonna jump through the hurdle and do what I got to do, but I don't hear my own voice. So that in turn is really, Julie, one of the things that inspired me for the podcast, where folks were like, well, Matt, just make a podcast. Well, what is a podcast? Well, Matt, you know what a podcast is, don't you? No, not really. I mean, Julie, before I started my podcast, I really didn't know much about it. And I said, okay, sound pretty cool. Let me watch a couple clips on it. Watched it. Okay, that makes sense how to set it up. What are some things that I need? Okay, let me listen to some different podcasts, get an idea. Okay, that's kind of the flow. That's what they do. I'm thinking like this. Okay. And literally, Julie, in the matter of a month, we got my podcast up, rocking and rolling.
Yeah, see, I love hearing that. I love hearing that.
Yeah, but it all started from just the vantage point of, hey, I wish I had a space just to have conversations like this.
Mm-hmm.
Like you said, and I love that, and that, like getting coffee, like virtual coffee. Hey, I'm just gonna hop on this link with you. We're gonna have a great conversation. I'm gonna record it. I'm gonna edit it and push it out there. And Julie, it's been amazing. You know, going from a couple clicks. You know, I like, you know, this is kind of cool little pet hobby per se. You know, right? To now, you know, I think it's May right now, right? Yeah, we're in May. I have people, I'm like so booked up. I actually have enough content all the way through September.
Oh, that's
amazing. Like, I'm having things where I'm like, people are reaching out like, you need to talk to so-and-so. They would be amazing. Da, da, da. And I'm like, hey, that's cool. Can I get with you in like 6 months? It's not trying to sound cocky or anything, but it's just like, we've gotten in a space now where people are really looking forward to the content. And they're coming at me with suggestions and ideas, and they're sharing it out to colleagues and other educators across the country. And I mean, it's you know, it's amazing, Julie, when I get goosebumps thinking about a couple of years ago, oh yeah, I had this whim of an idea, and now look what it's kind of grown into and spawned.
Yeah, I think that's really important to emphasize, that something even as possibly intimidating as starting your own podcast might be, you could be up and running in a month. You just don't necessarily know what all goes into it on the front end. And when you do jump in and get on the back end, things start rolling. It sounds like some of the things that you've done have kind of taken on a life of their own. And that's, I think, when you really know you've hit on something great, when other people want to contribute and they're reaching out to you and they're engaged at that level. That's really cool.
Definitely.
Well, I know we're coming up on time here. I would love to find out what you've got going on now. What can my listeners find out there on the web that you're working on now?
Yeah, so I'm really excited. Shout out Dr. Wallace Ting at School Rubric. We collaborated on a project that I'm really excited about. Julie, I know you know, because I actually invited you as a special guest on one of the modules, but I've actually created my first master course. It's titled Leading Out the Woods, Building Relationships. It's 5 interactive modules, takes you through several activities on there. And, you know, at the end, it even gives you a certificate that you could possibly turn in for some type of in-service credit or so forth at your corresponding school or district. So I'm really excited about, you know, getting into the arena of taking content and putting it back out for educators at all levels, but then in turn they could use it for in-house or sustainable professional development, right? So be on the lookout. That'll be coming out probably, not sure when this recording is going out, Julie, but by the end of May, the latest. Let's see, you know, we've got several other books, children's books in my series, I Want to Be. So I encourage, you know, any of your listeners, if they're looking for some good children's books that are real inspiring, you could actually go over to the website, www.adjunct, meethilton, that's with an I, MEETHILTON, meethilton.com. And so far we've got, I think, 6 books out. We just finished up the 7th book, and we're working on books 8 and 9. So that hopefully those will be coming out later this year. Obviously, the podcast, you can find us on any podcast provider, Leading Out the Woods. I think right now, Julie, I think I'm at episode 59, 60. God, it's crazy to believe. It's crazy to believe, but yeah, we release them every other Friday, even through the summer for my educators out there. So I know they love that. We, God forbid, we try not to take a break. So every other Friday, we do release content, even in the summer. So, while y'all are enjoying your well-deserved summer break, you can tune in and check those out. Let's see. Oh, and before I forget, we myself, one of my colleagues, Dr. Samantha Fitch, we have a digital professional development book. It'll be more what we're calling like a processing guide. So kind of think almost like a manual. So it's a book, but it's actually an interactive book. And we actually walk educators through various scenarios and give them professional tips on how to utilize some of the different social media tools within their instruction, from like Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. So if you're not that tech savvy on some of that stuff, and even if you are, but you want to see some practical tips and examples, be on the lookout for that. We signed a deal with EDU Match, and that'll be coming out really, really soon.
Oh, that's awesome. And of course, I'll link to all of this stuff in the show notes. Matt, thank you so much for joining us. A lot of wisdom offered in this episode, and I think people are going to take so much away from it. So appreciate your time and talking to my audience here today. Thanks so much.
No problem, Julie. It's always great talking to you. It was great connecting with all of your listeners. And like I said, if I can ever be of service, please don't hesitate to reach out.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please share it with others, post about it on social media, or leave a rating and review.
To catch all the latest from Julie, check out whatsnextteacher.com or follow up on social media at What's Next Teacher across all platforms.
Thanks again, and see you next time.